people of the United States. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Hello and welcome to George Washington Slept Here, the civic education podcast from Freedom's Foundation at Valley Forge, where we explore American history, civics, and the idea of liberty through conversations with some of our favorite thinkers, writers, and leaders. I'm Jason Raia, Chief Operating Officer at Freedom's Foundation and host of George Washington Slept Here. The format is simple, a long-form conversation with a friend of Freedom's Foundation where everyone can learn something new. Before we go any further, a little housekeeping. We encourage everyone to subscribe to George Washington Slept Here wherever you listen to podcasts and make sure you get every new episode as soon as it is out. We love hearing from listeners, so please email us at gwshpodcast@gmail.com with your comments, questions, or suggestions, and hit us up at Freedom's Foundation social media at FFVF on Twitter and on Facebook and Instagram at Freedom's Foundation. Today's interview is with Freedom's Foundation new friend, Kevin Douglass Greene, Army veteran and great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, good morning. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, the honor is all ours. So our conversation today is going to be structured in a way that helps us keep on track. We want to explore your origin story. How did you become the person sitting here before us? The current work you're doing, especially with the Douglass Family Initiative. And then I want to talk about the state of America today and what concerns you and all of us today and how we might find some common ground. And finally, we end with a simple quiz. Didn't need to study, just a little bit of fun to wrap things up. So tell us, where were you born and raised?
All right. That was, I still consider myself an Army brat. So I was born in Paris, France. My father was stationed there in 1961. And then eventually we came back to the United States, and I spent the majority of my childhood at the same location, even though he was in the Army, in Seaside, California, which would be Fort Ord or Monterey Bay. So that's, and like I said, all my childhood was there in the same house, except for 1 year where I had the opportunity to live in Bangkok, Thailand.
Oh, wow.
My father was stationed in Thailand, so that was a great experience.
So a little bit around the world, but California was really the place where you spent most of your time.
Yeah, I was fortunate as far as being Army family, and the time of, his time in the 60s, he spent a lot of time in Vietnam. So the family was pretty much just stationary there. So when he retired, we stayed there. So I consider myself lucky as in a military family aspect, to where you have the stories of children having a different, different school each year.
I have friends who have been, moved 10 times in 10 years.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
And the challenges of that. So I could see where that's a real blessing. Who are your influences? Who were the most important people in your life in those years growing up in California?
I would say, this one's going to touch a little nerve, but it's okay. I'll work my way through it. But of course, my mother. Right. Considering my father, Army-wise, spent a lot of time back and forth away. So my mother, was pretty much the cornerstone of growing up. But also, it was the extended military family. We were in a very diverse community. So I had a lot of friends and families that were biracial. Mm-hmm. So I got to be a part of that melting pot that, really my view of people at a young age was, I know no one's really quote unquote colorblind, but the ability just to be raised with so many different people, different nationalities, I appreciate that so much. But as far as the one of the influences is what I was getting ready to talk about is we had the core military family of about 5 families. And recently, the last father out of that core passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
So tomorrow I'm flying back for his funeral in California.
Well, our condolences. That's difficult, but knowing that you had those 5 families and that you've maintained that through your entire life, I think speaks deeply to how important those people were to you.
Yeah. So Chief Warrant Officer E. Walker James, we called him, Uncle James, but he was more like a father with the advice and how he treated me along with his sons. He had a very good life, civic duties, even, once he retired around the community, very well known. So he poured a lot into a lot of different people. And so I really appreciate everything he did for me and our family.
Absolutely. You mentioned amongst these 5 families and the more extended military families that supported you and your mom, and especially when your dad was away in Vietnam. And it just makes me think that, and we're going to later on talk common ground and how do we find that, but the common ground there seems to be that you've got this single experience that everybody's connected to the military, and so you share that in common. Whatever you don't have in common, you had that in common. So there's this shared experience, there's this shared struggles and things to overcome, and yet you did that together.
Yeah, and what's interesting, if you look at the military over the years, the evolution of communication and everything going back, especially from Revolutionary War to Civil War and First World War and World War II, to where the communication was, the ability to communicate with your loved ones was really not there. There's the letter, and if the letter showed up, it showed up. If it didn't, it didn't.
And of course, there are all those stories that 5 letters showed up at the same time, and then for months there was nothing.
Yeah. So that that military connection was really really good to just have that connection. And then myself being a veteran, retired. So the time frame that I was in. We were able to do phone calls and actually they're called Mars. So we were able to do, the short, the ham radios.
Oh, okay.
People can connect phone calls. And now we roll into where everybody,
we've got video.
Between cell phones and Skyping and video, they can see their loved ones every day if they choose to. So that's a big difference.
Yeah, big evolution. So let's talk about before the one thing before we get to your joining the Army is you went to college and you played football. And yesterday you sort of summed that up in a funny way. Tell us about college.
After high school, I went to a junior college, Monterey Peninsula College there in Monterey. And, you look at the cost of education. At that time, basically, junior colleges were basically free in California, and you paid minimal for your books.
Right.
And so spent 2 years there, had a decent, football career. Enjoyed it, that and track, and also did decent in school. Right. And then I went to a university, Cal State University of Hayward, on the East Bay of the Bay up there. And basically, went to college for 3 years, but I only actually did 2, because that third year really was, academically wasn't all that great, and I hurt my knee. In football, which wasn't one of those career-ending injuries, but my academics was career-ending. And so pretty much, just figure out, okay, it's not that this college thing's not for me, but I just, just ended up being that way. And so I spent, I would talk about, out of my whole life, I've spent 1 year without military, without government benefit. And that was that once I turned 21,
right.
I was no longer under my father's benefit till I was 22 when I joined the Army. So that was just that 1 year without that benefit. And the benefits was growing up around a military community, knowing what it was like. I wasn't really afraid of what being in the military would be like, but I did realize the benefit and the responsibility of joining the military. Once I chose and I signed on the dotted line that basically I'm giving my permission that I am going to do whatever it is that we're basically told to do as far as deploying or anything like that. But I was blessed to not have deployed in my 20 years with the Desert Storm and the 9/11 Iraq, everything that I never did go to combat, and I was very blessed for that.
So so we're talking early 80s. Your football career and college career are sort of ending together. And what was it? The familiarity of your dad having been in the Army and grown up that pushed you in that direction? Was there something specific that said to you, "This is the way my life is. This is the way I need to go. This is where I need to be."
Yeah, it's interesting because in high school, I was getting more, of the military flyers in the mailbox than I was the college letters, and the mailbox is right next to the garbage can, and pretty much they just go in the garbage can.
Right.
And then, again, once I had to basically go into the regular job market, and ended up, living in the Bay Area, which I enjoyed, but, monetarily and everything, it was better for me. I'd move back home.
Right.
And I was working part-time. Actually, for those who know, I was a Kelly girl. So they had Kelly services. It was called Kelly Girl Temp Services at the time. And I was, I worked for Kelly Girl Temp Services. And then eventually it was just a matter of watching the people around me, because we were in one of those communities where either you had some type of family, there were family businesses.
Sure.
There were those who went away to college, which I had that opportunity to do, and there were those who went in the military, and then there were those who just kind of making it, and there were others that were going to prison or dying.
Right.
And out of those options, I was like, well, career-wise, staying where I was just really wasn't a good option to find an actual career. So again, I knew that eventually that that idea that I need to find something that's going to actually be smart to do.
Right.
And once I joined the Army, I did my 3 years, and then decided to re-enlist, and then decided at a certain point, I can do this as a career.
So when you go into the Army, you are Kevin Greene.
Yes.
And you're not using your middle name, the Douglass name. So talk to us a little bit about that. I know in other talks that you've given, including with our teachers last night, you talk about sort of there was an anonymity that you appreciated, that you could be yourself without being burdened by this historical name and all that came with it. But then eventually you grow into that and embrace it in a really important way.
Right. And just based on you saying that, I still enjoy that anonymity today.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that don't know. I can walk around, so there's, as they say, there's a price for fame.
Right.
Absolutely. In this type of thing, there's really there's no fame in being the descendant of Frederick Douglass. To me, it's what I was born into and what I embrace and try to. I use that when it comes to benefiting others. But yeah, Grew up as Kevin, yeah, was allowed to grow up as Kevin Greene. My mother grew up, who I'm descended through my mother. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C., so she grew up, when I say, basically under Douglass mystique, because her father was well known in the Washington, D.C. community. Her brother, both academic scholars, of course, Frederick Douglass and her grandfather, Charles. So everyone knew who the Douglasses were in Northwest Washington, D.C.
Right. And
so I don't know how much pressure that was on her, but I can only really kind of imagine as being like the only, few female Douglasses that it can be hard. And so with her marrying my father and us ending up in California on the West Coast, totally opposite of where she was able to be Jean Greene.
Right.
She was proud of being a Douglass. People knew that we were related to Douglass, but again, that wasn't our everyday. Our everyday was Greene.
Right.
And so being Kevin Greene has always been important to me.
Right.
People know, I have friends, and I'm still Kevin Greene. And when I meet people, and they're like, oh, I can't believe you. Right. And I understand.
Right. Especially like when you've been here for the last 3 or 4 days, and there's, 42 social studies history. They are here to study your great-great-grandfather, Frederick Douglass. So they see you and you're a rock star. Yeah. But other people see you and you're just Kevin Greene. You're just another guy.
But what's interesting, when I'm able to do something like this, where I'm able to interact with people just on a personal level, for the amount of time that I've been here, they know who I am as a Douglass. But then again, now I'm kind of like I can be Kevin Greene to a lot of people too, because they just get to know me as me, even though most of the questions relate to Douglass.
Sure.
But still, I'm able to make them. It's not like I have to make other people feel comfortable around me, but I like other people feeling comfortable just knowing me.
Sure.
And so then it was, I said, not until around almost 30 years old that I had some, we've had some actual, 1980s things in our house. I have actual first edition, my Bondage, My Freedom, and I have an actual period picture of Frederick Douglass in a period frame.
One of the most photographed people in the country, in the world at that point.
Yes, and so I just decided I wanted to display this stuff for people, and from there I was interviewed. And I had the opportunity to go overseas and just decide, okay, I'd like to, not go around telling people I'm Frederick Douglass' great-great-grandson, but I'd like to go around telling Douglass' story to in schools and Black History events. And so pretty much over the years, I've had the opportunity to do that every year. And being in the Army, I mean, I did it in Germany, Puerto Rico, Korea, and different, even though I was in different places in the United States, I was able to go to other states to be able to do things based on that. And so there was an evolution in what I did in that also. Originally, it was just basically telling the story about Frederick Douglass. And to do that, I also, even though you would think, okay, you're a descendant of Frederick Douglass, you should know everything about Frederick Douglass. Now, I had to read his books to get the same knowledge that everyone else basically gets about Frederick Douglass, because people ask about Frederick Douglass, and I do some of my, depending on where I'm at and how much time I'm doing, I say, so for those of you who want to know about Frederick Douglass, I'm not talking about Frederick Douglass because he wrote 3 of his own autobiographies. So if you want to know about Frederick Douglass, you can learn about him basically the same way I did. I had to read his books to get those details of his life. And so that's, just one of the things that I try to point out to people is that, and another thing is just imagine how many people in history do you know that wrote their own autobiographies at least 3 times? Most time people do it one time.
If at all.
Yeah.
You do it once.
Right.
And but he so why do you think he did it 3 times?
I don't know. I don't know if I've ever really thought about why he did it 3 times, of why he did it. But what I like about him doing it is that he would go back to the beginning.
Right.
He would start at the beginning.
Right. So he wasn't doing my early years, my middle years, and my late years.
Right.
He was going back to the beginning and start doing it again. But he's a different person.
Exactly. His perception, it's not that the facts have changed. It's how he viewed the facts.
How he has changed.
Right. And how he has changed. And so he would see and talk about things. There was time where he could, forgive and reconcile, because sometimes people were just part of the institution, and not necessarily that was their wholeheartedly beliefs. They were just kind of raised that way. That's the way the institution was. It doesn't take away of the fact of the whole issue of enslavement and everything, but he could see it a different way, and so he'd talk about his life and other people in a different way each time, and I think that's really interesting. So that's why what I thought about that is the Frederick Douglass books, that Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, that your students, the teachers here are able to receive, but, our main goal is to get those to students, is to have them journalize what they read, so that when they go back later in time, and if they decide to read the book again and read their journal later in years, their perception of what they experienced and learned and how they're reading it again is going to change. And so they can see what they thought about the book at 15, and now they can redo it at 25, and their knowledge and experience changes, and they can look, oh man, that's what I thought when I wrote this. That's what I was thinking about, and now I know. Wow, that's I know much more, and I can say, well, I thought that then, but I don't think that now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Every once in a while, I'll come across something I did in high school that, a paper or something, or, a letter. And it's amazing how we look at the things we did when we were younger and are just floored at, at the hubris of it, or just the uninformed nature, or how much our life experience has changed what we thought back then.
Well, it's interesting because I my hobby is model car building. And so since I started working virtually from home is when I got back into it about 2 years ago.
Sure.
Because I'm sitting there at the computer, I got nothing to do, so I set up my workshop over here so I can just slide over and work on my model while I'm not doing anything at the time. But it's interesting about my imagination as a teen in the early 20s when I was doing my models, and now I'm thinking, how did I do that? I mean, I was doing, because I was really into lowriders.
That's very California.
Yes, growing up. And so my models, I would create my models and do things with the suspensions that I was able to create, some hydraulic type stuff that I think about it now. And I was like, well, I want to do that now, but how did I did it then? But I had that, that raw just imagination of how I thought things worked. And now as you get later and, as you grow older, how things work. And sometimes that inhibits you from doing those creative things, because it's like your brain is like, well, it shouldn't work that way because that's not the way things work. But you were able to make things work that way before you knew.
Sure, you didn't know any better,
right? So, and you were able to do it.
Absolutely. And and let's talk just very briefly for those who may not know the story of Fred Douglass. He's in Baltimore. He learns to read, and eventually he escapes.
Yeah. So there's he learns to. There's an evolution between that also, because he ends up going back to the plantation environment. But at that point where he's learns how to read as a young man, and he goes back and starts working on plantation and stuff, but he still continues his ability to learn and read. He starts teaching others how to read and write.
Right.
He starts, basically teaching people the Bible, and eventually, he got to the point to where the slave master knew his ability to read and write and start giving, teaching others. So he's becoming a liability, but his value, the value compared to, the liability is more and monetarily. And so he's sent to the Negro breaker, Mr. Covey. So basically Mr. Covey's main purpose is to take and break the will of an enslaved person to where all they basically do is forget about escaping, forget about reading and writing. All they're going to do is be happy being a slave.
Right.
And so within that experience, Douglass hadn't really experienced it at anything at that level up until then as being enslaved. Again, using specific words as an enslavement, his life was semi-easy in a way.
It's that difference between plantation slaves and house slaves and city slaves. And he had for an enslaved person, he has a great deal of freedom when he's in Baltimore.
Right.
I know here in the earliest days of slave, when there was still slavery here in Philadelphia, they would go to work. They would be hired out and go to work, for different people and then come home at night. And so, but interesting that he goes to this slave breaker, and it sounds like that experience actually, rather than breaking him, sends him on this path that he has to be free.
Right. Yeah. Because within that, Mr. Covey treated him so bad that to the point that where Frederick Douglass left and went back to, go back to his plantation, and they're basically like, no, don't come back here because we sent you there for a reason. Don't, because he's thinking that they're going to realize, hey, this man's not treating me like you guys did. And so when Douglass had to go back, like the idea, like with, the tail between his legs type thing, eventually Sunday comes around, and Mr. Covey was he was a Christian, so Sunday was his Sabbath. So Douglass is like, okay, I'm cool with type of thing. And then Mr. Covey goes back into his Mr. Covey role and ends up getting this skirmish with Douglass. And, at that point, Douglass is like, hey, this is either uphill or downhill for me, and he fights back, overcomes him. He has the opportunity to make the decision of how the fight turns out. He let Mr. Covey live. And so, you can just imagine, because they're saying this goes on for a while.
Okay.
That they're fighting, and there's other, enslaved people around looking like, well, this, yes, I'm out of this one. You guys deal with it type of thing from his accounts. And so he has the decision, and he, let Covey live, and end up Covey didn't do anything to him again, but then again, he had a reputation. So he never told anybody what happened either.
Right.
And so from that point, that's just one of those levels for Douglass of him being obtaining a form of freedom, that his learning how to read was a form of freedom.
Right.
The fight with Mr. Covey and having that decision and saying basically, quote unquote, that no matter how long I be a slave, physical enslavement, in fact, that in my mind, body, and spirit, based on his experience, he will now forever be a free man, because that experience was freedom to him. At least once in his life, he knows that I gained freedom within this situation, and no one could ever take that away from me. Even if I just ended up being the rest of my life being enslaved, I still gained that freedom. But still, it empowered him, and so he went along, and then eventually ended up back in Baltimore, working basically kind of like the docks, and again he's now a young man,
right,
able to go back and forth to work, and he meets Anna Murray, who ends up being Anna Murray Douglass, and she basically, without Anna there would be no Frederick Douglass. We say that she realized she could see his future in him, and that this was the opportunity, because as long as he was in Baltimore, he had that excellent opportunity. He had the education, the knowledge, the resources between her and where he was located to be able to walk to freedom, to be able to wear the type of clothing needed, to have some type of resources and money and documentation, to be able to just get on a train and and head north. And so Anna was, the one who basically said, it's your time. It's your time. Because if he ended up having to go back to plantation environment, and here he is in his early 20s, who knows what
he might never
would have happened. Yeah, because he would have just existed in the universe as Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. Yeah, So
one more story, and then we'll move on. But tell us how he comes to the name Douglass.
Okay, yeah. So again, this is one of what I lay out as one of his evolution of freedom, because he obtained freedom in different ways at different times. So he is now, he's living at this time, whether he was living in New Bedford or wherever he's living at this time, I'd have to go back and research this part. But his ability to read and write was so important, because I always say he knew how to read and write.
Right.
That's not the basis of everything. It's, it's the base, but not the story that makes it so appealing. It's just that he knows how to read and write, because he could have walked down the street, looked at a street sign, found a piece, newspaper on the ground and looked at it and said, but he was reading The Lady of the Lakes by, was that Sir Walter Scott? And within that, he is able to, appreciate what he's reading and take it to heart and understand the words and everything. So within that, he takes the name Douglass from that and says, this is going to be our last name. It's based on something that he was able to understand and appreciate, not just read.
Right.
Yeah, not just because he could read, because he could understand and appreciate what it was about.
And changing his name is this act of becoming his own person, that he is no longer connected to his former slave master owner, whose last name slaves would carry with them, but he has now given himself his own name.
Well, actually, Bailey was not. Bailey was the family name of enslaved. Okay. So the Baileys still live in the east in Easton, on the Eastern Shore to this day. But it's the idea that name actually in a different form and pronunciation is from the mother country.
Oh wow!
So they were able to still maintain that that name. It wasn't the slave master's name, but still, it's a matter of also that he needed to reinvent himself and obtain some anonymity, even though once he did that, he stepped out into the limelight to tell his story. And so the target is still on his back. But, fortunately, he had, the grace of God and other supporters that surrounded him to allow him to do the things he did in the abolitionist movement without him being, assassinated, captured. But it was always, I guess it was always one of those things, always looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, that threat's always there.
Yeah. Plus, he I guess, they talk about his stature, not just because his physical, he was, they say, well, compared to me, he probably kind of, his stature might have been similar to mine. But it was not only just because there were other large slaves and large freemen, but the combination of how he presented himself and how he spoke and all that was the package that made that, that perfect, you got that perfect storm
right
within him and how he was supported within that process.
So you mentioned he becomes part of this abolitionist movement and of course becomes one of the lights, one of the great speakers, the orators of that movement, because he's telling his own story over and over and over. And that's important for the movement. Earlier this year, I just recently read, you actually met the great-great-grandson of John Brown.
Yes.
Who is another at the at Harper's Ferry is he leads he's a white man who leads a slave uprising, the idea to take over, but you got to meet his great-great-grandson.
Yes, Brian Evans.
Tell us about that experience, because they knew each other.
Yes,
briefly.
They knew each other more than briefly.
Okay.
Yeah, they had a friendship. They met each other several times. I believe John Brown even stayed at Douglass's house at some time.
And I believe tried to get Douglass to be part of Harper's Ferry.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did try to get Douglass to be part of Harper's Ferry. And I guess that, I think is really Douglass kind of saw that this was not going to be it was, basically kind of a martyr mission.
The chance of success
was very.
It wasn't necessarily that he was against the violence of it so much as he just was against the fact that it was probably going to fail.
Right. And so he did not accompany John Brown within that. But meeting Brian was real nice because he's a very, very intelligent man. He's actually, scientist. I think Brian was in college at 15, I think it was.
Wow.
I think he was at University of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But yeah, his ability to talk about John Brown and Douglass was just, so refreshing that, because I never really dove into their relationship. And so listening to Brian talk about it, it's something that was definitely added to my knowledge and legacy. But also he had a pocket watch that Frederick Douglass presented to John Brown for their friendship. And he let me hold it. That thing felt like a grandfather clock, even though it was the size of a little bit larger than a Kennedy, whatever, a dollar, the silver dollar. Sure. But it was definitely craftsmanship on that thing. Right, was like, wow, how could people do that during that time?
Incredible. The function.
How functionality of a watch works is like, wow.
Yeah.
But anyway, so actually met Brian in February and then had the opportunity to do a program with him on Thursday here in Philadelphia at Strawberry Mansion High School.
Oh, excellent.
Dr. Palmer from here, local gentleman, was our moderator and had a nice conversation. We had a nice large crowd. So basically it was part of the Juneteenth celebration.
Right.
Yeah. And so real nice guy. So we're going to try to do some more work together.
Yeah, that's really wonderful that you were able to meet. Such an interesting that these two figures that any student of history and particularly of Civil War history, you know who these two people are. They're two of the most important names that you come across, and for the two of you to have met and now developing this relationship, and again, at the center of that is students and being able to share those stories.
Yeah, because what we believe is that this is us meeting together was like the first time that direct descendants of Fred, since Brown and Douglass last met each other, that we're the first time that the direct descendants have been together since that time.
I remember reading a couple of years ago the descendants of Dred Scott and Roger Taney from the Dred Scott Supreme Court case. Roger Taney was the Chief Justice. That the two of them met and have been doing a similar thing where they have been talking to students and again, there's something very powerful about meeting someone who is directly connected to these important stories. In the same way that this morning you were on a tour of Valley Forge.
Yes.
There's something important about when you're at the actual place where history took place, when you meet the descendants of the people who were part of that history. It just brings it alive in a way that very few other things do. Yeah,
and I've been fortunate. It's nice to meet what we consider legacy families. So, the Steele family, the Tubman family, Nat Turner family. I mean, all these different legacy history, Black history figures, families, having the ability to meet and sometimes collaborate with these families is really neat.
That's incredible. So I want to just jump on a little bit about America today. A new Pew Research poll just came out, conducted in April, showed that 77% of Americans think the country will be more divided in 25 years, in 2050, than it is today. And I just found that shocking. One, because I'm not sure how we could be more divided. Everything is a 50-50 split. No matter what, throw any topic out there, half the people are going to, agree and half the people are going to disagree. I guess I wanted to start just personally. Do you see the future as bleakly, or are there things that make you hopeful? Things like the work that you're doing in getting your great-great-grandfather's autobiography in the hands of students. I'm curious how you see the future and this division, and do we get beyond it?
Well, I definitely have to be hopeful, because I have grandchildren.
That'll make you hopeful.
Yeah. So, just part of being the solution is a lot of times things start in the home. And so whether it's things that, and I think in every home, how they deal with things or educate, they often feel that is the positive. Whether or not it's not seen as positive, or not politically positive or something like that particular family, this is the way it should be with our home, and others we can see that and say, nah, that's not the way it should be. It's divided, it's dividing and blah blah blah. But it definitely starts in the home. And then, if you go up all the way up to into government, from the top down, a lot of times it's depressing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a lot of times now you look at parties and it's like really don't, in a lot of aspects you don't see one party as being the doing it. You can't say that each party's doing everything wrong, but you can't say they're all doing everything right either.
Right.
And so that's definitely a challenge.
You certainly understand why the founders, said maybe no parties. Like let's not, let's all try and be in this together. And instead, we have very early on the system of parties, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, the Democratic Republicans come into it, and they are set up to oppose each other.
Yeah.
And then that trickles up from people or it trickles down from the parties, but it puts us in this position. I'm curious if you think there are lessons from Frederick Douglass that help us think about how do we find common ground. I mean, you look at the relationship between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, and there were times where Douglass is very unhappy with Lincoln.
Yeah.
And yet there are many times where he sees Lincoln as important to not just the abolitionist movement, but to saving the Union, that he recognizes and is able to find what they share in common, even though there are things that divide them.
Right. And I think that was the main thing about Douglass's vision is that he knew Lincoln wasn't perfect. He knew every no man was perfect. And he had to basically, kind of stay in his ear, to try, especially, in that time, it's not that easy. But, him showing up to the White House that I want to see Mr. Lincoln.
Right. Sure.
It's like, hey, guys, and so being vigilant and being in, so he was definitely an influence on Lincoln. And again, they didn't always see things eye to eye, but I believe, that there was a respect that he knew that if he was able to interject, Douglass couldn't interject his whole agenda, but part of his agenda to get to the next step.
Right, to nudge him, as opposed to push him off a cliff.
Right, trying to jump from the from the base up to the 10th step without going through the other steps. Some people can do that. And some processes can do that, but not all of them. But he knew that getting a specific thing done first would be able to possibly get the next thing done. And that was, definitely the Union winning the Civil War was definitely
that was the first step.
Right, was part of like if the Union doesn't win this, everything else is pretty much mute.
Right,
like that.
Right, because then you're
women's rights, the slaves' rights, everything just is basically status quo from there, and it probably will end up being worse than it was in the beginning. If that's can be the case, but yeah, that definitely had to be the first step.
And you pointed out what I think is central to their relationship, which is respect. That there is this mutual respect that allows them to push beyond where they disagree.
Yeah, because even if they didn't voice it, in certain, especially I think on Lincoln's part, he couldn't always tell everybody that, I wholeheartedly agree with Douglass. You know, it was kind of like, okay, I have to do this in a way that it seems like it's more my idea than his, type of thing. But he makes sense.
And there were plenty of things that either of them had said that could have been reason enough for them to say, oh, this guy doesn't understand me. He's not going to listen to me. I'm just going to walk away and not engage. Yeah. And instead, they have this great respect for one another, and so they listen to one another. And I think there are times where Douglass pushes Lincoln and Lincoln moves, and there are times where Lincoln pushes Douglass and Douglass moves, and that's the beauty of this engagement based on respect, that they're able to develop this relationship that allows them to together move the country forward.
Right. Yeah.
So let's do our quiz. We're going to wrap this up.
All right.
Okay. So question number 1, excluding Washington and Lincoln, who's your favorite president? It can be historical or from your own lifetime.
Yeah, no, I pretty much have to say Barack Obama.
Okay. What's one thing you would like to see every American learn more about?
Damn, I'm trying to think. What's the first thing went in my mind? International football. Oh. No, I'm just
okay.
Not really, but I couldn't think of anything.
No, that's if you had not chosen a career in the Army, what do you think you would have become?
What I would have become? Oh, man. And what was the opportunities that I had? That's kind of like the basis is, I still think I would have, I consider myself successful. I would have, it's a possibility I might have somehow got into coaching.
Okay.
Possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
What pet peeve annoys you the most? I talk about this because I have a million of them.
But, right now, it is in our professional environment, people calling me Kevin.
Oh,
I'm Mr. Greene.
That fair enough.
But we've gone to the idea that that all these parts of talking to someone has
the
gone
formality.
Away.
It's all
so
gone in.
You cannot offend anyone if you call them by their first name.
Right.
But I don't know you.
Yeah, fair enough.
So that's just my pet peeve as an old person.
No. Favorite movie?
Oh, I know I can watch Shawshank Redemption whenever it comes on.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a great one. What one thing about you would most people be surprised to learn?
Well, I cry way too easily now. Seriously, but for those who don't know me on Facebook or something, is that my hobby is model building, and it had been for a long time, even though I had a break in there for a while. But I still have models that I built 35 years ago that were packed away that I was able to take back out. And
that's very
them.
cool. That's just a bit of your own personal history.
Yeah.
That's very cool. 2 more questions. If you could meet just one historical person, and we'll say not your great-great-grandfather, who would that be?
Let's come back to that one.
Okay. Last one's easy. Bourbon or scotch?
I'm going to divert.
Okay.
Grand Marnier.
Oh, very nice. Excellent.
Yeah. And so the person that I would like to meet, excluding my great-great-grandfather in history, I am going to get to meet him.
Okay.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
There you go. That's probably as good a choice as you could possibly come up with.
Yeah.
Mr. Kevin Greene, thank you. It was so great meeting you. We got to meet a couple of years ago, very briefly, and when I knew we were doing this program on Frederick Douglass with teachers, I knew I wanted to have you back and spend some time. So thank you for coming. Thank you for coming on the podcast and talking with us and sharing stories of Frederick Douglass, but also just some things to think about, and that's what this is all about. So thank you very much for being here.
And I appreciate it, and I thank you very much. And, I think there's probably plenty of people who know, but plenty that maybe don't know the importance and the significance and the appreciation of the Medal of Honor Grove, that is such a experience to be able to go out through there and just enjoy the space that it's in and understand what it means, especially, being a veteran. So thank you very much.
Oh, I'm so glad you got to enjoy that while you were here. Thank you. I want to thank our producers, Laura Kennedy and Sarah Rasmussen. A special shout out to friend of the pod, Bill Franz, for his art design on the logo. Special thanks to longtime Freedom's Foundation historic interpreter Bob Gleason for his contributions to the intro music. And most of all, I want to thank all of our listeners. Please subscribe, follow, rate, and review George Washington Slept Here wherever you listen to your podcasts, and tell your friends to learn more about Freedom's Foundation at Valley Forge. Check out our website at www.freedomsfoundation.org and follow us on social media, or email us at gwshpodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or suggestion. Thank you and goodbye.